Hi guys, and welcome to another edition of The Kevin Moore Show. Now on today's show, you're about to watch an interview between myself, Kevin Moore, and Bentinho Massaro. Now this interview was recorded this year in 2018 on location in the Netherlands, and this was a couple of hours outside of Amsterdam. We talked about all things spiritual, Bentinho's teachings, his philosophies and more. And I just wanted to release this interview before the end of the year, so enjoy my interview. Bentinho, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I'm guessing, when you look back, right, and you could never see what you're doing now. You never saw this as being part of your path, did you?
Actually, I think I did in many ways. Depends on how far back we go. But as soon as I got interested in spirituality and finding out the underlying truth of existence for myself, I've always had an inclination towards distilling and translating that information in a way that I would feel would give people greater access to it themselves. So there's always been a fairly strong blueprint that what I was to be a translator or teacher. So it's not entirely crazy to me that I've ended up in this role, so to speak, if that's what you mean.
I do mean that. Was there any sort of books that you had read that were really like, oh my gosh, I realize that I'm more than my body. This is my truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Lots of books. Once you start looking for the truth, like enlightenment, self-realization, if you find the right books, then you'll get that hammered into your consciousness, and then you start practicing and meditating and seeing if it's true, and then you find out that it is. So.
Being on this journey, there's so many different types of spiritual teachers out there, mm-hmm. and that there definitely is a difference between the older generation of spiritual teachers and the newer ones.
Yep.
I could probably name a couple of differences, but it's almost like there's a newer way of doing things. Mm. I think that's what your work represents a bit as well. There's a quicker way to get to that part of not just knowing that we're a soul having a human experience, but then how do we live that? How do we, if we become what we may class as spiritual, so what, in a sense? How do we use those tools that can come from that side, the information that can be pulled in from that side, into this experience?
Yep. You're seeing a lot of just a new generation of souls coming in, period, but also just the state of the world changing so rapidly, communication, social media, a combination of all these things and many more that are hard to name, combined definitely changes and has changed in the past 10 years the nature of spirituality and how it's delivered and what sort of picture it forms in people's minds and how it can be integrated in everyday life. I think it's an inevitable movement based on the changing state of the world and also the timing of things sort of cosmologically and the, if you will, vibrational acceleration that's occurring right now. Different kinds of teachers and different kinds of things become more relevant, become more immediately relevant. Like spirituality is a vast spectrum of understandings and insights and principles to learn and engage with and master, if you will. And certain principles are more relevant at certain times than others. And right now you see the relevance of sort of a mainstream awakening to these concepts, combined, I'd say, with the capacity to love and understand each other and see beyond our biases and our preferences and our differences. So I'd say love and understanding is the priority at this point for us as a civilization, as a species, to make progress. But also things are stepping up their pace. There's an acceleration happening. Everything is faster. And in order to cope with that, our consciousness also needs to be able to hold more information with clarity. Otherwise, there's a lot of potential for disarrangement of the mind, so to speak, or the sense of self.
I mean, how old are you?
30.
So a spiritual teacher, I mean, okay, would you want to be classed as a spiritual teacher? Do you wear that label?
I try not to wear it, but I don't really know what else to call it when people ask me. And I guess it's as innocent a label as anything else, or as useless a label as any other label. So sometimes if people ask me in the streets, what do you do? I usually say I'm a spiritual teacher, motivational speaker, or author, or just trying to make sense of it for people. But it's a little weird to be called spiritual teacher for several reasons. One being that spirituality, from my point of view, is not separate from life. So to be a spiritual teacher, it almost sounds like you're a tennis teacher or you're a soccer teacher. It's like a hobby inside of life, or in addition to life as it is. There's this thing called spirituality, and you're a teacher of that. From my point of view, spirituality is simply life. It's the science of life, if you will. It's the understanding of life. So one friend once said he's not a spiritual teacher, he's a life explainer. So it's kind of nice in a way, but it's hard to get away from the title spiritual teacher, both for practical reasons, and people love to use it.
They do, and I think we've got labels here that come from people generations before us, and we continue those labels.
Yep. And
I think that can be an issue. Not an issue, but I think it's time, especially in the times that we live in now, to start coming up with something newer. Can something newer be brought through than what's not been brought through before? Or is what's being brought through the same and repeated because we never listened in the first place?
Mm-hmm. Yep, nice.
So as a younger, I'll call you motivational speaker, someone that's using teachings that are coming through you that are helping empower people, right? If we weren't going to use the spiritual term, right? As a younger person bringing that through, now I've met many younger people coming through into this field, from regressionists, channelers, medium psychics, right? And the difference with the younger generation is they seem to be not so ego driven, not so I want it for the fame, or as soon as I've kind of made it in the field, then I'm going to become an arsehole, right? Less coming from that space, more wanting to be of service, right? Approachable, yeah. And the most important quality in the younger spiritual teachers, oops, I said that word again, right? It's so easy, right? To slip back in, right? Is that they're living by their teachings. Are you living by your teachings?
Absolutely. I am my teachings. And so I explain what I am and what I experience. Those are my teachings. It's not the other way around. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and we'll go back into that. But have you seen or witnessed that which I'm saying, which is when you see them on stage, they come off, and then the other person comes out?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's true in a sense for me too, but that's part of the game of not having a fixed identity, is that in different contexts, you play different roles. Now, the difference being perhaps between what you're describing and what I'm describing is that for me, that's a very conscious, deliberate act of acting. It's an act of blending. It's an act of navigating what's relevant in which context and adjusting. Because if I were to maintain the state that I choose when I'm on stage, if I maintain that all the time, my friends would never be comfortable around me. If that makes sense.
It does.
And they already hardly ever are, So it's difficult enough to have people feel comfortable around me. If I don't goof off, if I don't make mistakes, if I don't have fun and be a kid, then it tends to not generate as much ease in them either, and the people around me, to let their hair down and just be themselves, Which when people come to a retreat or an event to be taught something, so there is a relevance there for a very direct, powerful flow of teaching or transmission to occur. But that's not always the agreement or the request off stage, both from my end or their end. And so So I adjust state-wise, which is different than people coming on stage and putting themselves in either a certain state or acting what they are as a teacher, but then off stage, not having integrated much at all of what they're teaching, which is, I think, what you were describing.
I am, and do you find it difficult sometimes, or has it been difficult, or has it been a learning process that, when people see you as one person, when you're maybe just hanging out somewhere or whatever, that that you want to be that a kind of approachable person still, but that you don't want them to see you as, the sort of guru. It's about them becoming their own power, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. And if I were to always be in that state, it would just be it would come across too authoritatively, and so it would be too intimidating, and then people would not be themselves around me. And again, already that's a challenge sometimes, So I do whatever I can to kind of free that up and show people, like, I'm just a guy, and I'm just having fun too, and I'm just like messing up and all that stuff, which I am in a way. So
that's great.
Right?
That's great to yeah. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
That's perfect. That's perfect. And
it's kind of the Clark Kent thing too, having different identities for different things that make sense. I'm also not the teacher on stage. That's also a certain configuration of what's possible within the realm of how I can choose to express myself.
Yeah, I've just noticed with some teachers, and no names mentioned, of course, but they're just not living by their teachings. Mm-hmm. And I just find, and I'll repeat it again with the younger generation, and I'll put you in that box as well right now, that it's just different. It's different. And that's a good thing, because we need that.
Yeah.
We need change. I mean, that old paradigm, these old teachers have done some great work, right? But just for me, it feels like it's time for them to move on a little bit now and let something newer come through.
Yep. And it's kind of, in a perfect world, shame does not exist. But in a conventional sense, it's a bit of a shame that these older generations, if you will, or these sort of situations that have occurred in the past, are giving spirituality a sort of a taboo name in mainstream. Like the word cult is thrown around immediately, just out of fear and paranoia, based on some of the experiences from the past. And you'll find that the younger generation, not saying all of them are necessarily fully pure or clarified in their intention or in their vibration, but they're having a bit of an uphill battle in terms of how they're perceived. They're kind of taking a lot of the heat from the actions of those in the past, if you will. And I would agree with you, I think in general, that the younger generation of life explainers, if you will, are quite naturally more, I wouldn't want to say pure-hearted, because I believe ultimately everyone is pure-hearted, but let's just say they're walking their talk in a different way. Also, they have different priorities, they have different motivations. Some of the older generations, it seemed to be a little bit more about getting validation and power and that sort of mania. Whereas the new generation, and speaking for myself, when they think of that, there's something in them that cringes. It's like, feels unnatural.
Right.
They actually desire natural interaction with others, and they don't necessarily desire to be pedestalized.
And I think the younger ones came through a bit more awakened.
Yep.
A bit less of a veil.
Yep.
Just a bit. And it's that tiny difference that seems to make all the difference. And
Agreed.
And when you mentioned the cult word there, if only people really understood what cults are. And when cults are mentioned, we're talking about really wrapping people's brains into one leader's way of thinking.
Right.
That is not what's going on here.
Right.
And I know you've had accusations against you, right? And that must be hard, right? I mean, it can't be easy, right? And you've just had to keep walking your walk, doing your work, and knowing that you're coming from the right space.
Yeah, exactly. That's all you can do anyway.
But it's so easy for armchair people, I call them armchair people, people in their armchairs to throw accusations around. And I think we live in an age right now where we do that very easily without any evidence. Now, if the evidence was there for something and you had all that, well, that's different. You know that. That's called investigative journalism. But to have baseless accusations, yeah, well, you know, it's funny. This community of spirituality, and let's also combine the UFO community there a little bit, because that's now going to consciousness as well. And you're doing more of those kind of conferences as well. There's a few more that you'll be attending soon. It's a funny old state that it's in right now. People will believe anything. The most craziest stories, where it's almost like, well, we've either slipped a pill, you know, we're not grounded. When something's too far-fetched, it's come ungrounded.
Right.
Yet people will defend that ungroundedness to the nth degree. Yeah. And it's like, then there's you that's coming from a spiritual perspective and a grounded perspective, and you know, and we still get attacked. It's like, well, do you understand where I'm coming from? It's a funny arena right now.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of like there seems to be sort of a separation process underway where all the extremes of Earth's history, if you will, is coming out in a boiling point. All the different lineages and generations and demographics and niches, if you will, they're all kind of being housed right now in individuals to an extreme extent. So you'll see the extremes of all the movements of the past kind of trying to figure out where to fit in this new evolving, accelerating world. And I really see, I see as sort of a distillation or a separation process is occurring, where we're still fighting a little bit and there's still this conflict and this confusion and trying to convince each other. But there is sort of a process of that separating, and I mean this positively actually, a process of allowing for each demographic to, in a sense, live their lives and live their beliefs and live their experience. And ultimately even like shift into quote unquote a reality where the other timelines, if you will, or the other experiences are no longer part of the equation of that experience. So you'll have different harmonious versions of humanity.
If I was to say to you, what's the most important message of your work, what would that be?
I would ask you a question saying, who am I talking to? Am I addressing mainstream planet, or am I addressing diehard spiritual seeker?
Why would there be a difference?
Because there's a relative importance to people in general right now, which I would say is the message of love, is the message of having faith in oneself, having faith in the universe, if you will, or faith in higher self, however you want to say that, God, source, and opening the heart to other self, and dropping the biases as much as possible, dropping the personal insistences, the personal points of view as much as possible, really opening the heart in love to other selves. That would be the most important thing right now from a time-based point of view. Now the quote-unquote die-hard spiritual seeker, the seeker who's here to find the truth of truths, they usually, definitely not always, but they're already open to opening their hearts to other selves. It's not usually that big of a deal. They may need more practice or integration. They have their lack beliefs to work through, but the willingness has already been accomplished. That's not a big deal to them necessarily. It's understandable, and they practice it in their daily lives. And to them, if you have that level of desire for, say, enlightenment or self-realization or the truth of truths, then you will, your focus becomes timeless. It's no longer relative to what's occurring. It's no longer contextual. Your search is no longer based on the circumstances of your life and the changing times in the world and your interactions with other people. Now it becomes a timeless search. It becomes a search for the timeless. And so all that time and worldly stuff kind of disappears. And there's just that desire and that focus to know the source within. So to that type of seeker, say something else, for example. Right?
If I was to ask you then, okay, what is it you would tell the diehard seeker? Would that always stay constant?
That would stay more constant, yes, than the time-based one. Good
Right.
point. Because that does depend on the time we're in. It does depend on the context of what's occurring to some extent, the dynamics in the collective consciousness. Now, probably for the remainder of this life, it would still be the same message. But if I were to live for 1,000 years, the relative message would change, but the timeless message would stay the same.
So, have you ever written a book?
Some of my talks have been transcribed, and it's been edited a bit, and that's turned into a book called Super Accelerated Living. We're working on several books now, also based on transcriptions, and I may write a couple myself.
And that's interesting. So from actually the teachings that came through you, they're being transcribed. But it's interesting how you started off, because most people would have started with some books and then build up to doing events like you are, right? But you went the opposite way around to that.
I've always had this feeling of when I would try to sit down and write a book, the inspiration for that book would come in a single download, if you will. So it'd be like, oh, great. And I would see exactly what the point would be and how to sort of drive the reader to that point. But the actual manifest process of writing a book is a slow process, right? So then in a sense, sometimes the inspiration or the excitement for it has already gone because it's already integrated here. But when I'm speaking to, say, a live audience, there's a sense of acuteness and directness and immediacy and aliveness there. That's always been a more natural mode for me to feel inspired to share. So that being said, I'm starting more and more to appreciate the value of having a well-curated, well-written, well-thought-out series of books available that people can reference back to time and time again.
There is a value to that.
There's definitely value to it.
But I think your journey is interesting, how you never started off, because you basically started off, if I've maybe got this right, from your dad's attic, in a sense.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, you've been doing lots of work on yourself before that. I mean, there's many other interviews that will cover those subjects. You've been to India, there's all sorts of things going on, right? But at that point, from your parents' home, that's when your life kind of changed into teaching and evolved more online. Just that process. I mean, because are you living full-time in America right now?
Right now, I'm traveling quite a bit, but I'm officially living in the United States, yes.
Okay. So how did you go from being in the Netherlands to sort of full-time in the US?
Well, first of all, I fell in love with a woman that was American.
That will help.
So, but also I really enjoyed, I was invited to some conferences in the United States after some of those videos in my dad's attic, as you said. And people took sort of to the aliveness in those videos and the freshness and the authenticity of them, of just a kid shooting a little video. And so I got some invitations to do some conferences and teach in the United States. And I just found that it was incredibly easy to talk to that audience in general. And it just flowed really well. And so I came back a few more times, was invited a few more times, hosted a couple of my own retreats. And there was just such a natural feeling to it that I could see myself. And I love the actual country, like the actual land of the United States. I think it's one of the most beautiful, pieces of land. It's so amazing just to drive through and stuff. So I love the land. Yeah.
Good God, we're the same soul here. On a split reality check. I do as well. I love America. Do you know what? I spent 190 days over there recently, right, just filming. And I realized something, that there are souls over there that are much more advanced and awakened than anywhere else in the world. And I was like, that's why I was pulled there.
Yep.
So when you say you found it easier to do your events there, it's almost like the seeker over there it's at a different karmic level. I can explain it no better than that, really.
Nice. Yep. I mean, there's always a mixture, right?
Of course.
So, yeah.
There's the good, the bad, and the not so
right.
good. Yeah.
But definitely the creme de la creme that live in the United States are overall really highly advanced consciousnesses, and it's very pleasant to have an advanced dialogue with that carries a lot of integrity. And
But how did you trust that? So you're over there, you're building your platform up, and you're setting up events, and I'm guessing you're thinking, well, who's going to turn up? How's this is going to pan out in the sense of to build this as a sort of career for myself? That must have been in the back of your mind a little bit, just obviously how this would unfold.
So in the beginning, I did everything based on donations, and for 2 or 3 years, I think. I traveled and I lived where I lived just based on the moment. And actually nothing much has changed, except at some point we started charging, because I realized if I really want to help more people, I have to get over my own sense of I shouldn't ask any money for this, which actually became an obstacle to the vision, which was to help more people. Ironically, to reach more people, I realized I have to start charging, at least for some components of what I do.
Cool.
So we started expanding, and I was able to begin hiring some people and working in more structured ways. But the thing is, I've always been so lit up by the state of being that I can access, or states of being, I should say. Or you could say the message or the truth of it. I've been so lit up by it that I've never really felt like I want to strategize my life around anything else. I've never felt that this is my life. I've always felt that this is a window into something. This is a vehicle.
And you've concentrated, as I put my hand like that, you've concentrated on just one thing. You haven't really said, I'll try say yes to this, and I'll also say yes to this.
I wouldn't say that's true. I've been very intense, and I've been very concentrated and very fierce with the things that I've engaged in, because I've always appreciated the preciousness of this relative space-time that we are given, so to speak. I've always been highly aware of not to waste my time on things that are redundant or not in alignment with the greatest good of all, or with the vision, if you will. So that's always been strong. But that being said, I've delved quite deeply into a variety of topics, and tried to become competent in these fields quite naturally out of inspiration. It would hit me, and I would obsess over something for like a few weeks or a few months, and like integrate it and distill it and get good at it and be able to teach about it. And several topics like that just started showing up in my life, that all aided and assisted in what I'm doing today. It's only recently that things have kind of calmed down, that there's sort of a retirement process happening almost of simplification. But I'd say for about 10 years, there was an intense, concentrated exploration of many, many fields that I felt I wanted mastery, or at least a high degree of competency in, because I knew it would make me able to share the message more effectively, more efficiently, in all kinds of ways.
Sure, and with the message as well. So when you do the retreats, when you do your events, I guess even when you're at someone else's event and giving a talk, do you kind of structure it out what you're going to say, or is it just in the moment?
Yeah, I would say never. I've maybe a handful of times just made a couple of notes if some ideas came to me. But I've never structured my talks. I've never planned out my talks. For this 7-day retreat here, I had no idea. There's literally no structure.
But for a person that's interviewed 80 plus channelers, that to me is your channeling.
Yeah, I would say that I am channeling, with the difference being that A, I don't go unconscious for the information that I channel, and B, the information that I channel, it feels like it's me. And for the vast majority of it, I feel that it's lived and it's experiential. So it does and doesn't feel like I am talking, if that makes any sense.
It does. And yes, of course, there's trance channelers, and the newer generation of channelers are conscious channelers. So they embrace the teachings as they come through. And yes, it's their experience coming through. But I still feel with some of the information you're bringing through, it's a greater part of you you're tapping into.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
It's not the conscious part all the time.
Well, the thing is, it is conscious. Most of what I share is conscious to me, because it's been I've dug so deep into it, so to speak. I've intensely set with those impulses, those intuitions, to the point where they've become experiential and clear. Just like if you were to describe how a pillow is made to me, and you've done your research for how that pillow is made, and you've been to the factory and you've tried it yourself. Similarly, the information that I share, I'd say 95% or so roughly of it is directly experiential. And so it's actually rare that information comes through that I wouldn't be able to back up with my own experience.
But does that happen?
Yeah, it has happened in certain ways. Yeah, there's certain things that I've shared that I haven't directly experienced, but they're just relative things or knowledge-based things, or like things about certain parallel realities or ET civilizations and stuff. I wouldn't be able to say I've traveled there physically and hung out with these civilizations and this is how they operate. So some of that information is intuitive and is more of a channeling nature in a typical sense. But most of the things I share is directly experiential. It's based on practice. It's based on going deeper into levels of consciousness. And everything I share there, I have experienced before. So it's a combination. I'm probably in a similar or same state as a channeler, if you were to look at the brain activity of a channeling state. So the channeling state is the same. And I would say I'm in a channeling state pretty much all the time, during daily life as well. And really, we're always channeling something, right? In a way, you could say there is no non-channeling. It's like a tuning fork or radio. You're always dialed into one frequency. So we make these artificial distinctions for the sake of being able to talk about it and give a message to people. This is what's possible. But again, same with spirituality. We create a distinction like, oh, are you a spiritual person? That's, to me, it's like asking, do you exist? Right? It's like life itself, spirituality. Same with channeling. What are you channeling? Not are you channeling?
And those that I've met that have a separate name for what they channel, there could be a portion of them that are wishing for it to be that way so that they don't take responsibility of how powerful that they are.
Nice. Yeah, I think in some cases that is probably one of the blockages that are self-imposed. Because we have this seeming need to always think small of ourselves, to always fear ourselves in a way. And it's just easier to say, oh, this comes from another source. And sometimes it does. Sometimes there's an agreement there between one sovereign soul entity, if you will, and another sovereign soul entity. In a lot of cases, this is the case, I believe. And so there's an agreement there. This soul opens up the vehicle of the bioelectricity of the body. It becomes a channel to that source speaking through, so to speak. For me, the sense has always been that when I'm teaching, like I said, it's a little difficult to explain because it feels like it is me that is speaking directly from experience. And at the same time, in everything I do in life, I don't feel that I'm doing any of the things that I do. It's like I'm watching a movie.
Like you've gone into a car and you've taken the back seat. You're not driving it anymore. It's someone else driving it. Yeah.
Correct. But ironically, at the same time, by being in the back seat, it's like you have vibrational mastery or control. So you're steering the car without being hands-on.
Yeah.
You're steering it, but you have the GPS in your hands, but you're in the back seat. It's kind of like that. You're not doing all the things. You're watching your body and your mind speak. That's why I can speak without any preconceptions of what I'm going to say at a retreat or an event or here. I can even do this to the extent where I am not aware of what I'm saying. But so it's very similar to what channelers claim or experience. But there's some differences there, I would say. Or if there aren't any differences, then channelers simply are not aware or have not described some of the things that I would describe about the process. Because the way it has been described, I don't fully resonate with classifying myself as a channeler.
No, absolutely. And yeah, we're all on a different path, aren't we? And we're all contributing towards growing ourselves in some way. And it's difficult to judge, whether one's right or one's wrong. I think for me, the judgment, judgment's a strong word. For me, the thing for me that would be the sort of kill switch is that, is it coming from love? Is it empowering? And is it allowing me to become my own master?
Nice. Great. I think that's wonderful. I think if everyone could be instilled with that type of discernment before they head out into the battlefield of spiritual teachings, I'd say that'd save a lot of people a lot of trouble. That'd be great.
What is the one thing that you see people at your retreats suffering from, or trying to overcome, or trying to maybe escape from?
I'd have to say the sense of unworthiness. I summarize suffering as all forms of suffering lead back to believing in lack. Something is lacking. Either something has lacked, something is currently lacking, or something could be lacking. Take, for example, the fear of death. It's a form of suffering, to fear death. You can trace that back to the belief that you will lack existence when the body dies. Take, for example, the fear that your loved one will leave you. It's the belief that you will lack feeling good and amazing and loved when that person leaves you. Any bit of suffering can be traced back to, I believe that this is, was, or could be lacking if such and such happens. Any type of psychological contraction like that can be traced back. So it's not the desire for a partner that causes suffering, like Buddha supposedly said, desire is the cause of all suffering. It's not the desire for a partner, it's the belief that what you seek out of that is currently lacking from your own state of being. That's currently lacking, that you don't have availability to the frequency of love that you choose to generate and experience when that person enters your sense perception. So anything could be boiled down. I've not found any psychological suffering that I can't trace back to, I believe something is missing, lacking, or not in place, or not complete, or impossible. And so I would say that what I see in my audience, which is no different from any audience, which is no different from planet Earth, it's just the conditioning we were raised in on this planet, is to think small of ourselves, is to believe we're lacking love, is to believe we're lacking worthiness to exist, that we're not perfect as we are. I think almost all psychological distortions and insanities and corruptions are based on that. Like trying to compensate for feeling a lack within of something.
Yeah. That's almost like a philosophy as well, isn't it? In a sense.
Yeah. It's part of my work, I guess.
Do you think if philosophy was taught in schools, we would be coming away as different people?
Oh yes. It's part of what we're attempting.
Right.
To bring that into the education system in very accessible ways, using analogy and playful ways that kids can understand at a very early age. How to use the emotional guidance system, for example. How to see that everything is possible, that they're not lacking, and that they don't need to steal and thieve and corrupt. They can be themselves. Everyone can be themselves. These kinds of principles.
So with your work then, obviously I know that you had an interest in the law of one material. I just wanted to touch on this. Why that particular channeled material compared to any other channeled material?
It's the best. I mean, that's my bias. But well, I picked it up when I was 15, I think, for the first time. Maybe 16. And this was mind-blowing to me because I read this. And actually at that point, I hadn't embraced as truth anything regarding ETs or aliens or a lot of the spiritual stuff that I had read or heard about. I've always been actually, believe it or not, I wouldn't say skeptical, but very discerning about what I hear and not immediately believing the fluff. But when I read this book, not that this book validated all the fluff in the world, let me be clear, but definitely not. But what it did confirm for me is one thing regarding ET consciousnesses. It did way more for me, but one valuable thing was I read this as a 16-year-old or 15-year-old, and I was like, there's no way a human being could come up with this. There's no way. There's no way a human being could come up with this so consistently, so throughout, so detailed. I know people are capable of a lot, the Star Trek series and what have you.
Well, they say that was channeled as well.
Well, there's that too, right? So I think any great piece of art, any great piece of fiction or science fiction or fantasy has some basis in truths and parallel realities or dimensions, and there's some channeling going on there. There's a lot of intuitive activity in that creative work. So the imagination is a communication channel between different realms or realities or possibilities. But that being said, even so, someone can make an amazing 10-season or 100-season long epic fantasy science fiction. But there was something about the way that this was disseminated, that the entity spoke. I can't imagine any human being, especially not, a bunch of people in that book, coming up with this. And not only coming up with it, but being able to state things in that way, like the way they use language. So the whole book felt so authentic to me as they described going into the channeling sessions and then the entity coming through, and all of it just felt like the only explanation for this is that this is actually what happened.
Yeah.
So for me, that was a milestone shift, because then I knew that, no, in fact, there are consciousnesses that are extraterrestrial in origin. There are higher densities, higher concentrations of consciousness and light that can become invisible to our current sense perception, but they can still cross-communicate. And so it became very scientifically viable to me.
Well, it's like a radio, isn't it? As we tune to different stations, we're tuning to different frequencies.
Right.
We can't see the electromagnetic spectrum, but it's obviously provable that it's there.
Right. Well, imagine being able to see every email or text message or phone call visibly going through the air, right? That'd be insane.
Yes.
So thank God that's not the case. But, well, I guess it is for like NSA and stuff. But, yeah, so we believe that, we use that, but when it comes to spiritual things, or when we call it spiritual things, or...
Well, I think the way you described it there, that these beings that were in contact with Karla Ruckert were from a different dimension. If we'd gone to the coordinates where they told us they were, we would not see anything.
Yeah, right.
It would just be space or whatever it would be there. I got to see Jim McCarthy
nice.
on the journey, because he's got a research centre. David Wilcock spent a lot of time there, actually, years ago, at this research centre. The Law of One. But for me, well, actually, no, let me ask you, what was the draw towards the ET consciousness? What could you learn from them that wasn't something that you could learn here yourself?
Several things. One is just a general sense of expansion that I never got from human teachers. Even to a point where at some point, human teachers, I no longer felt that human spiritual teachers had something massive to learn me. Maybe some ways to describe something slightly differently, but the juice was gone. Like I could read the best spiritual teachers. There's a couple of exceptions maybe that are timelessly like resonant for me, but the vast majority, there was no juice left. I could see above and beyond it. I could see where they came from in what they spoke about. I could see why they said that and believed that. I could see all the loopholes of their systems. So my experience was I can see above and beyond this, and what they share has been integrated plus more. So at that point, my search moved on to embrace more of the ET consciousness channel materials, specifically, especially the Law of One, which is so rich and dense in teaching that it could be used forever, so to speak, to learn from and to fine-tune from. So, does that answer your question?
It does. I guess I just have to be the spearhead, the champion of the rest of them, though, because I've met so many, and I did love a lot of them, right? The majority of them, right?
Are you talking channelers or spiritual teachers in general?
Yeah, channelers, which a lot of them were kind of spiritual teachers. I mean, I loved them all. I can't say I didn't, and there were some teachings that were more resonant with me than others. But I think there's this, you have to go with what's pulling you,
Sure.
right? And you know, when do we get to the stage, some of us, of not wanting to seek someone else, and we just can go within and just say, look, forget all that now. I've done my searching.
Nice.
I hold the answers now.
When our capacity to directly recognize the actual God state within has been accomplished and is accessible at will, no matter the circumstances. If circumstances can still obscure or cloud our innate capacity to recognize the God self that we ultimately are, from which everything comes, then at those moments when the circumstances or the circumstantial view obscures the divine view, the true view, the ultimately true view of what we are, that never changes. This goes beyond conceptual relative reality or spirituality. This is the more absolute stuff I was talking about. My experience of this is every time that the circumstantial or social or even spiritual view obscures the direct vision of the God that is all that there is, then we need teachings and teachers to minimize or diminish that veil. When our capacity to access that has become unfailing, no matter what emotions we have, no matter what thoughts we have, no matter how confused we are, when we have learned to directly realize and sense into, at the lowest level, just sense into our greater self, at the highest level, be the God state, then there's no need for external teachers. Because one could simply become absorbed in that, and that expands and radiates, and it purges everything that's not true.
And are you reaching that space often, do you feel?
Oh, I've reached that capacity a long time ago, and so I don't need external teachers in that way.
For me, I've always known there's something beyond our current understanding. You know, God, it doesn't stop at God. And God is just a word spelt backwards, it's dog. It's a kind of word of encompassing the all that is, but I've always felt there's something beyond.
Great, that's so good, nice.
Yeah. And I feel the group that I'm working with, that I channel, it was their mission, or they're on some sort of mission of going beyond the unknown, into the unknown. Even when I speak these words, it makes no sense to me. I wonder how many times we've done this before. How many times has this reality, this reality is in the moment now, right? And we haven't done it this way. I wonder how many times we did it before in this communication like this, and we did it in a different way. And what we missed out from that previous, maybe there's no missing out. Maybe we're trying to reach beyond a point where we got before.
Cool. Sounds like a great script for a new science fiction.
It does, don't it?
But yeah, I mean, I feel what you're saying, and I think that the essence of what you're sharing, there's definitely truth to that. Repeating cycle of the one infinite creator experiencing itself through all the infinite ways that it can, and repeating certain things from a slightly different point of view every time, and building on itself and building on itself.
And building on itself and building on itself. This conversation came up again and again and again with different channelers, and they would say, you know, we've done this before, but we're asking different questions now. You're asking different questions. Isn't that interesting? And I was like, well, what didn't we do before? Where didn't I get to that I could have got somewhere that I didn't? And it was never like that. It couldn't be answered like that. This was just unique. And if something could come from that was unique, then that which is would know itself more. My understanding of all that is, in a sense, is it gave its life for us. So that which it was, it can never be again, but it will be something more. But how useful are words like that for people? How useful is a conversation like this?
That's why you're exactly demonstrating why I asked you what audience am I speaking to, right? Because if you're talking to an art aficionado about like the subtlety of using aquarelle paint with a particular type of brush in a particular movement, that does not appeal to everyone, but it appeals to those people that have that fetish, if you will, that excitement, that passion for that topic, that are working at finer levels of their soul. And so if you have those quote-unquote diehard seekers, you can have entirely different types of dialogues that are relevant for their journey where they're at. That just, if you were to go on Oprah and speak that, it would not be that relevant for most audiences. They would just scratch their heads or
well, she would as well, I think, in some sense.
Potentially.
Some sense, yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah. Well, she picked up the Seth books and she put them down years ago, which I can't blame her because they are quite intense, right? Yeah. But yeah, we all have an audience that we resonate with, and I think the audience that you resonate with sometimes are sometimes at your level, or they're sometimes maybe we're at a different office floor. I think, right. I don't want to be cruel about it. I think sometimes with different office floors, you've got a different view, a different perspective, haven't you? And sometimes your perspective is one perspective, and sometimes it's maybe larger. But going to your work on the multidimensional reality, which I think is quite important, would you say that you're shifting all the time between, put this to yourself maybe, that you feel that you're shifting? Will I ever speak to this version of Bentinho again?
No. But same for me with you, right?
So what we met...
You're completely changed being right now. And you choose to regenerate a lot of similarities, but you're 100% different entity each moment. Otherwise you'd be stuck in a snapshot and you wouldn't even move, you wouldn't even talk, you wouldn't even think. The whole illusion of movement is because we shift from one parallel universe to another configuration of subatomic particles that forms a different universe that has no structural relationship to the previous one. In fact, there is no previous one. They all coexist simultaneously within this multidimensional universe of the now. And we're just choosing which frame to choose next. Like pictures on the floor, you can go from this picture to that picture, create your own sense of linearity, but there is no structural linearity. It's the relationship to the images, the relationship to what reality is chosen, that generates the experience of linearity.
So as we're seeking that which we're choosing to bring to manifest into our life, we're constantly shifting to different realities that will get us to the point that we think we're going to get to, maybe, but depending where we're coming from, the intent of that which we want to create for ourselves will depend on the multidimensional aspect of ourselves that we are right now, in a sense. That doesn't sound too easy to understand. Am I making it more complicated? I might be. But you know what, the funny thing
is... But you're having fun with it, right? It's your passion. You talk about it, I can feel you like... You're like fine-tuning and your vibrations are like crystallizing.
Oh man, all throughout the documentary, right, everyone kept talking to me about the multidimensional reality, and every time I'd go see another channel, I was like, oh my God, not this again. I was like, why are we doing this again? And they're like, well, because the message is, they say, that it's time to know how massive and enormous your soul is. You are so much faster than you understand. Right. That's why that message comes through.
Nice, yeah.
And it's like, well, yeah, but how applicable is that? And when it must be applicable, I think it's showing us that, yeah, it's showing us that our vastness, but does that take away someone's pain when they're going through a bad process? Does that take away someone's suffering that's got depression? I don't know.
It can, because and it's not about taking it away, it's about resolving the perspective that generates the pain, right? So if you look at it, that person has a perspective that generates that suffering to begin with.
Got a small perspective.
Correct. If you provide them with a meta perspective, that perspective is more in alignment with the vibrational nature of the universe. And so there's a harmony experience between the entity and its experiential energetic environment, or the truth of consciousness, or the truth of creation. As a result, that harmony feels to the emotional body like joy or peace or contentment or fulfillment. Whereas if we attempt with our perspective to separate ourselves from the truth of creation by projecting lack, which cannot exist in an infinite universe, our vibration literally is dancing a tune that's out of harmony with the rest of the choir. Our emotional body interprets that as pain or suffering. So if you can provide someone who's suffering with a meta perspective, they contextualize an event differently, and if it's in alignment with the actual purpose behind it, then it no longer feels the same pain.
Do you ever find yourself going out of alignment sometimes?
Sure. Yeah, it's become a very fine-tuned process.
Sure.
If I have a thought that's out of alignment for even a second, I notice it, I feel it. So it's become a very immediate process for me. Whereas in the beginning of the journey, there's a lot of leeway. There's a lot of sort of sloppiness, right? So right now it's like...
But there's parts of me that doesn't want to lose his human experience, because I think knowing that my only truth is I'm a soul having a human experience, that's the only truth I know to be true. And that another truth maybe is I'm aware of my I amness, and I'm sure it's not my brain. I know it not to be, I just don't know, I can't define it, right? But at the same time, with all these fantastic teachings that we can get, I know that being here, present right now, must be so important. This must be important. Otherwise, why would I have the awareness of it?
So I think that's great in general. I often say, just because it's an illusion doesn't mean it's not relevant or valuable. There's a purpose. The illusion would not appear if there was no, from infinite intelligence point of view, if there was no reason for it. So now that being said, the word important is something I think people should be careful with, so to speak, because when you say it's important, you put a lot of emphasis on it, or some people could, right? Yeah. Attachment creeps into outcome. When you say something is important, it means you put all your biases and preferences into the creation process, and you're bound to hurt and suffer left and right. However, if you can understand this is one big illusion, it is a video game of sorts within consciousness, within the higher self. It's a projection. Things don't exist independent from perception. It's one enormous multidimensional perspective.
And it's a shared perspective as well.
There's a consensus experience, right?
Yeah.
So, that being said, I would replace the word important with there's value here. Just that. But as soon as people get tied up with expectations, particular kinds of outcomes, because they deem it important, then it's become an ego trip rather than an appreciation of the value of the illusion.
Do you know, one of the biggest lessons of the value of this illusion that I learned just this past week was, I've already started my next documentary, and that probably upset some people, but because I've just got to get this first one finished first, right? But I've been interviewing someone that's in a California state prison, been there for 36 years,
wow.
Committed a murder back in '82, has admitted to me on the phone of the murder. And I thanked him yesterday when I was in Almere, because I arrived early and I've got some friends over in Almere in the Netherlands. And I thanked him over the phone because the biggest lesson he gave me was for me to realize I am free, I am free, I am free. And that was so liberating. I can do what I want. After this, I'm traveling to Switzerland. You know, on the phone to him yesterday, you know, I said to him, I'm in Amsterdam, and I was like, it must be weird for you to hear that. You've been 36 years in jail. Now, I'm not saying he didn't deserve it. I'm not saying we shouldn't lock people up. I'm saying that set me free in so many ways. I don't really care much right now, to be honest. I mean, I care to be with you, and I care for my next thing that I'm going to do, but I just don't care about the outcome anymore.
Yeah, wonderful. That's beautiful. And look at the beauty and the dedication of a soul like that, demonstrating that through a life of imprisonment and confusion to start it off with, to be able to inspire someone like you who then reaches thousands of people by helping you make a state change within yourself that greatly influences every aspect of your work. So it's all interconnected behind the scenes. Nothing is what it seems.
No, that's a very good point.
And we can't judge on appearances.
No, exactly. That soul came to have that experience, well, with free will. He didn't have to do it.
Right.
Let's just, there is a free will aspect here. But yet, look at some of the greatness that came from, I'm sorry for the loss of the life that he took, right? I'm not saying that, of course I am, and I'm dedicating my movie to that person, right? The life that he took. But, there is always something good in any situation, isn't there? But I just don't know, I just feel free from money worries, I just don't feel the noise as much. The noise is gone. Don't we suffer from noise, don't we?
Oh yeah, yeah.
It was so bad it was last week. The noise was really bad, but that's what your teachings do as well, I believe. It takes away the noise.
Yep. I'd say most components of my work aid and assist in that. And some not. Some have the potential to generate more noise. But that's up to the student. It depends on if they're also using the other work, which will help them slow down the noise and see through the noise. But I also have components to my teachings that deal with engagement in life and how to, shift into parallel realities, resolve conditioned beliefs and all that, which is a very active activity, could increase the noise if someone doesn't balance it with the self-realization work that I also teach, or the enlightenment work, which is about knowing the divine one within, beyond the mind.
So
that's why I sort of teach both paths, empowerment and enlightenment.
And all those courses, they're available online through yourself?
Yeah, I have a free online school. People can follow just lessons, as many lessons in video form. So it's trinfinityacademy.com.
We've been putting the links of your various websites on the screen as well throughout this interview. Yeah, what you just said there about the parallel, tapping into your parallel selves. Yeah, because do you feel that some other versions of us are affecting this version? Yeah, and we can heal those other versions if they're causing. Yeah, but sometimes something that interesting that came through on the channeling documentary is the ripple effect. Is if something is so wanting to happen in a future event, it ripples into the past for that to increase in speed, in a sense, to get there quicker. So they were saying, like, when you feel your world just falling apart sometimes, just know something that's wanting to be birthed is sending its energy back in there, because all time is now.
Nice. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
You channeler?
yeah.
Of course you are.
Yeah, no, that's what came through with everyone, lots of other people, the ripple effect, and it was like, wow, I've never heard it. When it comes into the perspective of your work of parallel realities, that's why I'm saying what your work is so important. The parallel reality it is such an important element.
Yeah, it's valuable.
Very valuable. What would you say? Because obviously we've got to come to an end here soon. But is there like a most important message of your work?
Love yourself and other self.
And other self. What is the other self to you?
Anyone that appears at first glance to not be self, but upon deeper investigation turns out to be other self, or the rest of yourself. Sometimes I say there's yourself and there's the rest of yourself, which we often perceive as outside of ourselves, but it's just the rest of ourselves. So to learn to love self, to come into a space of stillness within oneself, where one is not running around in compensatory mechanisms and programs of the mind, trying to find validation or even trying to find spirituality. If you want to find the truth, all you have to do is sit down, be with yourself, give some space, become as still as you can possibly become. Practice this, and in that stillness, your shit will come up. And when your shit will come up, all the untrue perspectives that no longer work for you, which you feel through the emotional guidance system, but you then exert physically or externally and start seeking and creating all the noise, and then you lose all touch with yourself. If instead you redirect that courage inward, that energy inward, and you are determined to become still within yourself. Just means present, doesn't mean you have not a single thought in your mind. It's okay if you can't immediately stop thinking, but slow down. Become so present with yourself that you gain access to what's not true, and it comes up, it's purging in that stillness. It can't survive. It's seen, it purges, it processes, and so you can acknowledge it, accept it, and let it go. And then beyond that, you will find, after that purge, every time you do that, there's a deeper and deeper contact with the true self that occurs within. The stability of your consciousness increases, the self-love, the empowerment, everything we seek through knowledge and tools is available through direct contact with self. But to do that, we need to not project out into the world everything we feel and experience. We need to come to stillness or presence.
And I see you do that stillness at the beginning of some of your retreats as well, and the beginning of some of your talks. And I understand why you're doing that as well. I think it's not an easy thing to come on stage and come into silence, right?
Mm-hmm.
and for people to understand what you're doing. But as you explain it there, it makes complete sense why you do that as well. And I think when you're healing the other self as well, do you think you're also healing other parts of you that are private parts that you don't talk about much, which can come to you as quite negative sometimes, or other aspects of you which are buried deep down that maybe come from previous lives, or wherever they're coming from? We know we have these parts sometimes, and that, from what you've explained, that helps to heal all those aspects as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, I think that's important.
Yeah.
There was one other final thing I wanted to ask you as well, which this is all kept in context, but obviously relationships for you. Do you feel that as a younger, I was going to use that word, spiritual teacher there, right? It keeps creeping in. It's just but as a younger empowerment person, right? Whatever, you know, it's someone that's going to help empower people, right? Do you find that your relationships or your understanding of relationships has changed as well?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Because I say that, right? Because I'm sure I've got this wrong, but you were dating 2 people at one time, or you have?
Yeah, there were a few months where we had a 3-way relationship. It wasn't me dating 2 people. Well, in a sense, it was that, but we were all traveling together, and they were in some kind of relationship with each other as well. So there was that. Yeah, it was a few months.
And see, I've come across that with other people. I won't say I haven't, but a little bit in the channeling community. And they were saying to me, these others were, that you know, all these old paradigms we've got where we should just, you know, relationships should be, for most people it's one way, but when someone breaks that mold, you know, it can cause us to think, well, how can that work? Is that the right thing to do? Should our commitment just be with one person? And others have said to me that because of a new paradigm right now that we're in, that actually it's okay to love more than one.
But I think it's impossible to not love more than one. That doesn't mean you have to be relational with them as you are with the person that you're with. I'm actually very hesitant to engage with anyone. Currently, I'm in a monogamous relationship, and to me, I mean, I've explored and expressed what I felt I needed to explore and express, and I've modeled and demonstrated what I believe I wanted to or had to model and demonstrate to give the world a certain image that can break apart some taboos and cause new paradigms. Because if all public people and all spiritual teachers walk the same kind of walk and carry the same kind of clothes and have a beard and whatever, sit in a cave, and that paradox will not bust open the minds of the people. And all taboos are obstacles to the road of enlightenment, if you will. Paradox and confusion are the gatekeepers, as the Buddhists say sometimes, to enlightenment. If you can't handle paradox and confusion, you're not ready to pass by the gatekeepers. And so I demonstrate that and model that in my life in all areas.
But isn't that so true, though? Because, you know, it's so easy for me to sit here and say, oh, you know, when I cross over, yeah, you know, that guy that murdered that person, it's all okay because there was agreements made and everything else, right? You know, and then we could use that on an open relationship as well. Oh, on that side, it doesn't mean nothing. Do you know what I mean? It was just the souls having a human experience and everything else. Isn't it great they got to experience that? Because now we can download it to everyone else. And, you know, for example, we all get to maybe, you know, review that life at some point and experience it. You know, I don't know if that happens, right? But I'm sure, the picture's bigger than we understand, right? But then when we're here living it, it's like, You can't do that, you know. No.
Yeah.
Well, and we're strange like that, though, aren't we? Sometimes, how we're so easy just, you know, to think of it one way. Yet when we're actually here living this life,
I think we want to look at it in new ways, but our entire emotional makeup is created by this conditioning that we've carried for so long, for generations, right?
Other people's truths.
Other people's truths. We carry that as our own feelings today. Our own triggers today are other people's truths. And so consciously we may see the value of some of those new paradigms, but the process of meeting those parts of past generations in the form of our own thinking and our own feelings, and to maintain that courage and that faith in that new view is a challenge, you know? It's what this generation and the past generation or two, I'd say, and perhaps one more generation after us is in the prime of, is what they're here to do.
And it's, you know, just we're almost at the end here as well, just to say that, but just, you know, having lived in Holland, right, for a little bit, I lived in Almere, and
oh, you have?
Yeah, and having Dutch friends, in this country, I would say spirituality, let me just say that again, in this country, I would say that spirituality is, they're very logical over here. Dutch people are very logical.
Right.
So when I learned that you had a Dutch heritage, I was a bit surprised, because that's not the norm for Dutch people to be so open.
Well, I don't live here.
That's true, yeah.
You know, like having traveled quite a bit and having lived in the United States and in different countries at different times, you really do, if you're conscious enough and deliberate and you want the truth, you will see the truth about yourself in all aspects and layers, and you will also transcend the country within you. You will become a global being. You will become a cosmic being, not just a Dutchman or an American or all that stuff. You start to see all those subtleties of every country you visit, and you see how limited people are by it without realizing it, how identified they are with the ethics and the morality of their country and the conditioning. And so I've had the privilege and the desire to break free of that. And so now visiting Holland, I can see all those dynamics, but I'm beyond it, so to speak.
But you did choose as a soul a hard one to incarnate into.
I chose what?
A hard one to incarnate into.
Or in terms of the mentality.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I guess I picked good parents.
I think you did.
Yeah.
I think you did, because your father, well, your parents, they help you with some of your retreats as well?
They do, yeah. Actually, my mom was the main organizer for the one here last year, and my dad was the main organizer for the one here this year, together with someone else. So, yeah, and they watch my live streams, they come to my retreats, they're like practicing my work, so it's cool. And they introduced me to meditation when I was 11 or something.
Oh, so they were open to
they started their spiritual journey when I was 10 or 11, and so they were, in their excitement, started kind of overflowing about some of the tools and techniques.
They opened you, in a sense, as well.
Yeah. And at that point, it was still quite practical, the kind of things, you know, quite like grounded.
Because even though they were into the subjects, you could have still walked away from it.
Right, yeah. No, totally. It resonated fully. I was like, yeah, of course, this is true. Of course, this is exciting. Of course, yeah, everything is possible. I already knew that. That was like my brightness, was everything's possible. But then, like, to find confirmation of that, and like, oh, there's tools and techniques to allow everything to be possible. And now I can share these tools and techniques with my friends. And I was already teaching at age 10, like, yeah, look at this. I was taking my friend through this book of this like Silva mind control course where you meditate and use your mind. It's like, yeah, and there's this technique to it, so here's what you do.
The teaching was always there, and in these subjects, it was always there for yourself as well. Well, we've obviously missed out, 10 years of your work and more in this interview, but we can't cover it all, right? And I would just like to say, Bentinho, thank you for allowing me this chance.
It was really nice to meet you. Yeah.
You too. It's been a beautiful conversation.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Thank you.
Great, thanks.